يا ابو الحسن يا علي يا علي يا ولد طب جوا يا ابو الحسن لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله يا علي عطيه خير علينا لا اله الا الله دني بالك يا ولد على امريكان دني سوري على امريكان دير بالك لا اله الا الله
So the top story, viewers, we are tracking this hour is that Iran has fired at least 10 missiles on 2 US bases in Iraq, and they are currently housing American troops. In fact, Pentagon has confirmed the attack on the 2 US bases and said that it will take all the necessary measures to protect the US personnel in Iraq. Meanwhile, the White House has said that President Trump has been briefed on the attack and is closely monitoring the situation with his national security advisors. In fact, joining us live on this broadcast is Glenn. Glenn, if you can take us through the latest that is happening between the escalated situation between the US and the Iran, where now 10 missiles have been fired at 2 US bases. So clearly it seems like both the sides are not ready to really back down. And somewhere we are seeing that it could even escalate further. So what will be really the repercussions of these attacks that are constantly happening back and forth between these two countries?
I can't hear anything.
Glenn, if you can hear us, if you can take us through the escalation that is happening between Iran and US, what will be the repercussions of these constant attacks that are happening now? Iran has fired at least 10 missiles. So if you can take us through what will be the scenario like and how tense the situation is likely to get even as we proceed further. So taking our viewers through what has exactly happened, in fact, Iran has fired at least 10 missiles on 2 US bases in Iraq that are currently, in fact, housing American troops. Pentagon confirmed the attack on US bases and said that it will take all the necessary measures to protect the US personnel in Iraq. In fact, Pentagon has, in fact, confirmed that there have been no casualties till now at any of these 2 US bases in these attacks that have happened. Meanwhile, the White House has said that President Trump has been briefed on the attack and is closely monitoring the situation with his national security advisors. In fact, joining us live on this broadcast is Glenn Carle, who is a prominent US foreign policy and national security expert. Glenn, good morning from India. If you can take us through this escalated situation between Iran and US, what will be the repercussions like? Now, Iran has in fact been giving warnings to the US. It has in a way retaliated and hit 10 missiles, over 10 missiles at 2 of these US bases.
Well, thank you for having me. This is almost the first time since World War II that the United States has engaged in a direct crisis with a significant belligerent. The Cold War was always conducted through proxies. Our other wars have been largely, or the struggles in the Middle East in recent years have been militias attacking Americans, Americans attacking terrorists, and so on. In this instance, the United States killed the second most powerful person in Iran, and now Iran has responded state to state. So this is a different order of crisis than those that we've dealt with in the world in recent years.
Glenn, yet another important situation here is that the latest that we know is that Trump is closely monitoring this situation. That's what we know up till now. No casualties have been reported after the Iran strike. We are expecting the US to also retaliate post these attacks. But as we are seeing statements from the president coming out of calling Soleimani a monster, we saw the procession that happened at his funeral proceedings, where we saw several of these people, in fact, dying in stampedes as well. So even as we are seeing the situation escalate, do you think that this can lead up to a possible war, even if Iran has in fact spoken to the UN, stated that they are not in fact looking for that situation where a war is created, but clearly the entire situation is building up towards something more?
Well, you're right in your assessment. I think it's important to note, and probably is being overlooked by many, certainly in the United States initially, that Iran has taken a quite carefully defined step in its response. It has said, we will respond as a state. The United States attacked our state official, and then the Iranian attack we have just learned of is from the Iranian government openly against an American base and American targets. That's far different than using a proxy. And it frankly, actually is seeking to limit the expansion of the crisis. Nonetheless, it's hard to imagine that the United States or Donald Trump will not respond. So there's a grave danger that this will continue to spiral downward. Although the Iranians have, in their step, been prudent and yet also forceful in their retaliation.
That's right. In fact, Glenn, please stay with us. We listen into what US President Donald Trump had to say on this situation, where over 10 missiles have been fired at 2 US bases in Iraq.
So I think we've done a fantastic job, but eventually we want to be able to let Iraq run its own affairs, and that's very important. So at some point we want to get out, but this isn't the right point. The other thing is, if we do get out, we've spent a tremendous amount of money on building airports and building, it's one of the largest embassies we have in the world, Mike, and we want to be reimbursed for the various costs that we have had, and they're very significant, but we'll work something out. And I talk sanctions, but I'm only talking sanctions if we're not treated with respect. We have to be treated with respect. With what we did with ISIS, and this was done during my administration, because it was a mess before we got here. With what we did with ISIS, we've done the Middle East and we've done a lot of other countries a tremendous favor.
In fact, we just heard, Glenn, how the US president just hours before this attack happened is clearly stating how US is doing a great job when it comes to handling the situation. In fact, the Pentagon has also confirmed this attack now. So clearly, do you think that either of these sides in the near future will really try to de-escalate the situation? At this point, it does not seem to be like that. But even as we speak, President Donald Trump stating that Soleimani was a monster who was killed, and we are seeing further retaliation that might possibly happen from the US side. But is it possible that either of the side, either the US or Iran, might try to de-escalate the situation, or a third party would have to intervene?
Well, I have trouble imagining a third party intervening, really. It's ironic of me, a former CIA officer, to characterize in positive ways at all the Iranian regime, but they have clearly signaled their desire to limit these exchanges or this crisis through their statements and the missile strike taken. I'm not praising them for that, but it's been a carefully presented and calibrated response. Donald Trump has never understood, it's viscerally beyond him, I believe, that in any negotiation, and that includes warfighting, one always needs to leave an avenue forward for one's opponent. If you corner a person or an entity or a country, then you give them no way out other than to respond with violence. And the rhetoric is characteristic of Trump. What he said is largely in an alternate reality from the facts, and that's not too encouraging.
But Glenn, another important question here is, how do you think that US will really respond? Will it be a military sort of response, as we are seeing back and forth happening, or will it be more diplomatic this time, now that they are seeing that Iran is leaving no stone unturned in a way to put out their attack, as they have been warning the US? Will it be more diplomatic or will it be more military based?
Well, that's the big question, of course. I fear that given Trump's personality and his rhetoric, that the next steps, at least, will be military, which will then cause the Iranians to respond again. Now, the Iranians are quite rational. They don't want to see themselves destroyed. So they realize that if things deteriorate too far, that is quite likely to happen. But they also are proud and powerful, and they will respond. So the next step is for the United States, for Donald Trump, and I am pessimistic, given his psychological constitution and his rhetoric, that the step be anything other than a military one at first.